my wife Debbie and I, we finished our basement and I went virtual at the same time, so I got to move home from work. Well, we split having a shared office at that point. And I got to set up my office the way I wanted to. She could set up her office the way that she wanted to. Well, she's an artist, and her idea of physical space is quite different than mine. She wants projects out and supplies and stuff. Anyway, I went downstairs and put all the stuff in my office that I wanted to have, and on the wall, I created this beautiful I love me wall with all the certificates and me shaking hands with famous people and recognition for, and it's all about me. I love me. And I did get out the laser level, not quite the micrometer, but I got out the laser level in order to make it all fit. Well, I went upstairs and Debbie had spent the day working on her office, and she put things on her wall that she thought was important to show. She put family pictures on the wall, and there I was, front and center. So it's another one of those thin moments where I had the opportunity to transform immediately. Rather than inviting her down to say, let's take a look at what's in my office, what I said to her instead was, I'll be back. I went downstairs, took everything off the wall. It's in a box to this day.
Welcome to Titans of Transition, featuring real-life stories, anecdotes, and inspiration about pivotal career moments from leaders who have been there. Join host Joe Miller, former scientist and senior technology leader turned executive coach, as he unpacks transitional moments to help inspire change.
Welcome to Leadership Inklings podcast, the inaugural one.
Number one.
And I'm really pleased to welcome Bob Tipton to our number one podcast. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you, Joe.
And just before we started filming, we were thinking about how long it's been since we've known each other and how we actually first met, and we're not quite sure how that actually happened.
I don't remember the details.
Both being in technology, but we do remember a company that you were doing work with one of your companies.
Right.
Technology consulting. I was at Syntex in the science side, working on automation, and there was an automation project you were called in to help with.
That's right. All the exciting things about linking pieces of equipment together that shouldn't talk to each other in the first place was a lot different back in the mid-'80s than it is now. I gave it away. That's how long we've known each other.
It's been quite a while. And we didn't really get a close connection back then, but over the years, I did reach out to you several times as I was going through different challenges in my own career to get your advice. And there were some reasons for that, for me reaching out, that had a lot to do with some attributes, some qualities I saw in you as a leader and someone who actually followed their own heart and visions, which we'll get into over the course of the podcast here.
Thank you.
But let's talk a little bit about your career, if you don't mind. That's one of the things I do want to explore with this podcast, is to spend time talking to notable leaders about how they came to an understanding of what really drove them and what, in today's world, what makes you successful tends to be talked about a lot. I'm not really wanting to focus so much on the term success.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about your background, Bob, and the different things you've done over the years and how you've gotten to where you are today.
Okay. It's been an interesting journey, continues to be. I remember when I was very young, my mother asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I said, I don't know, tell me what it says on my diploma. And it's kind of been that way. My life is an emerging set of experiences that have filled a variety of different roles. Going way back, all the way back to when I was 19 years old is when I got into the world of technology. And my dad worked for IBM forever. I grew up in a blue house, literally. He had two ties, both of them sincere stripes, black wingtips, that whole thing. My grandfather was actually also in IT, although they called it something else way back when. He was the head of data processing for the Bureau of Reclamation here in Denver. So I'm kind of a third generation technology person. Well, I needed a job. It turned out my mom decided she was going to move and there was no place for me to be. So I read a manual on how to program in a language called RPG. And I got a job working for somebody that my dad kind of knew as an RPG programmer back in December of 1977. And I found that I loved the technology side of things. It was easy for me. My brain kind of worked that way. I could see the big picture, how everything kind of fell together, and one thing led to another, and I kind of built a very successful career in the world of technology. So different roles, from developer to systems administrator to CIO to CTO, just not a lot of jobs I didn't have in that realm. And there was a turning point, early 40s, maybe late 30s, where I found myself at a significant level of what you would consider success. A lot of boxes have been checked. And to use a Stephen Coveyism, it's like I was climbing the ladder of success only to discover it had been leaned against the wrong wall. I was looking over at what I call the story that was meant for me and wondered why I wasn't connected to that. So we'll talk more about this, but there was a kind of a dark night of the soul for a couple of years when it was a transition, moving from where I was to where I am. So where I am now is, I guess I've realized, going all the way back to my 19-year-old self, I have been about transforming the world. I've been about changing things to be better. And I guess I just used technology as kind of the lever for that for the first 20 years of my career. And the rest since then, it's been in a different realm. Like I said, we can talk more specifically about all that.
And it really connects with what I remember when I first met you when we were at Syntex. I remember seeing in you someone who was willing to take risks and who was very driven, but in a good way. You know, in a good way, always interested in making positive changes. And that was attractive to me, you know, as at that same point in my career, I was going through some tension. I had spent about 9 years as an analytical chemist in the laboratory. I was more interested in changing things than I was doing this sort of day in, day out role on the bench. And I didn't really have words to put around it, but I was attracted by things I was seeing you doing. You also had a reputation where we were being called on if people knew at the company and other companies that they needed some significant transformation to occur. And I remember that much. And then we parted paths after that. But that caused me to come back to you from time to time through my career as well.
Right. And I always was excited when I saw Joe Miller's name in my email or in voicemail or whatever. Yeah, I guess I don't know a different way to do things, to be honest with you. I have been in situations where things have been kind of dark and kind of bleak, but I've maintained a perspective that I'm in charge of the energy that I bring to the situation. The situation can be hopeless, but I don't have to be. The situation can be really, really dark, but I don't have to be. And anyway, the way that I show up with people, or try to, is to help call that part of them forward. Maybe they've forgotten it, or they have buried it so long ago that they don't experience it very often. But I think most people have a desire to be connected to something that's larger and more meaningful and something that's very fulfilling, but often life kind of gets in the way. We find ourselves doing things that maybe don't help bring that part of ourselves forward. And the risk-taking, I guess I've gotten much better looking at, the universe taps me on the shoulder constantly. And I've gotten much better at saying yes sooner than I did when I was younger.
Do you think that's because you have a better feel for what is in your lane, or what that space is you want to occupy?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's only answer it with a question. So is it more important to know or to trust? And the answer to that question often, I think, comes from your life experience, your worldview, just your perspective about things. But some individuals really just have to see everything spelled out, one step after the next. They're the tab A and the slot B types. If I can't see the path forward clearly, the whole thing, I'm not going to take a step forward. So that can paralyze you for long periods of time where you're just worrying and wondering about where things might be. The other side of it is a little bit like, this is a metaphor I'm sure you've heard before, but I can drive from where we are here in Broomfield, Colorado, I can drive to Florida where you're moving at night, trusting only the 300 or 400 feet that my headlights shine in front of me. I don't have to see the whole journey. I just need to see the next 300 or 400 feet. and I maintain the momentum and the guidance and so on to get there. So I think as I've gotten older for sure, and I think it happens for most people as well, is that having to see the whole journey starts to become less and less important. Instead, it's setting an intention and then trusting what you see in front of you.
That also speaks to living a little bit more in the moment, right?
Totally.
Right. So, and I think that's true. And I think in the coaching experiences I've had with my coaching clients, I often, talk about getting off outcome and trying not to focus so much on a specific outcome, but showing up as their authentic self.
Yes.
But having some sense of trust of knowing what that is at that point in time, and paying attention. We talk about having sort of a sense, getting some signals of when you're maybe off track. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah. No, that's an area of rich exploration. So I use something that I call the 3 levels of awareness, and I've studied a lot about psychology and consciousness and human energy and kind of how we show up and this thing, the power of the present moment, all of that kind of stuff. So the thing that I describe is the 3 levels of awareness. So the first level of awareness is this: I have discovered I've always done what I've always done. And I'm driving away, or I'm waking up in the middle of the night, or the next morning I say, why did I just do what I've always done? Well, the awareness is there after the fact. That's important, but that's just the first level of awareness. Maybe I wanted to do something else. There's a conversation I wanted to have, but I didn't. A decision. Anyway, I'm thinking about it after the fact. Second level of awareness is I'm in the middle of doing what I always do. I have a chance to be able to look at the signpost, the feedback that's coming to me, and decide right then to do something else or stay doing what I'm doing, but I'm aware in the process.
Right.
That's a chance, and we can explore some of those, because I know you have as well, some really thin liminal spaces where you have a chance to do something big.
Yeah.
So that's the second level of awareness. The third is I'm going to be intentional in advance. I'm going to be proactive. I know I'm going to find myself in a circumstance where I can decide to transform ahead of time. So anyway, the process of being able to stay in my lane, sometimes you get feedback after you've driven off the road. Sometimes you get the lane departure warning, like in a lot of cars today. You're just going out of your lane, and sometimes you plan the trip in advance so that you know how to stay in your lane all the way through.
There's also an element of discovery, right? So you have a sense of what it means to be in your lane, to be in your sweet spot, to be doing what you were created to do, to bringing that value into the world that you aspire to do. But then there is actually, I think, an opportunity to discover maybe the lane shifts a little bit. You have to be open for that too, don't you?
Yeah, most definitely. If we're going to continue the driving metaphor for a bit,
It's working.
The conditions change. The weather can change, or the grade in the hill can change. And if you're just simply on autopilot or speed control, you don't notice that. You just keep doing what you've always done. So yeah, there's things that can come along that say, maybe the view over there is a little bit more interesting, or maybe the path to that direction is the one that I should be heading on. And that's where being open to and receiving feedback is so critical. So many people out there are either just terrified of, or they know better when it comes to the future. They're terrified of it, or they know better. And the know better types, I like to think of like a full balloon. There's no room for additional air. And if you try to put air in a full balloon, it just explodes. So try to keep some room for something else to come in, have a beginner's mentality about certain things. But anyway, in my experience, when it's time to change lanes, I keep getting the same kind of feedback on a regular basis. It's the equivalent of lights are always turning red, somebody's always cutting me off, I get the slow driver in front of me. There's something about what I'm trying to do that the universe is saying, hold on. The view from a different road or a different lane or even a different vehicle might be the place to be.
Let's step back a little bit and think back over the course of your career.
Okay.
There's some extreme examples I know, as we've discussed this before, where maybe you've been asked to do some things where it was very clear. mean, we're talking a little bit a few moments ago about it being sort of a subtle sensing, but there's been some extreme moments where you had to sort of put your foot down and say, no, I will not, right? Can you talk about that a little?
Yeah, there have been a number of them, but I'll talk about just a handful. The first one was when I was 27 years old, and I had a meteoric rise inside of the organization. I was already the CIO of they're about a $500-600 million organization, national company, lots of responsibility, corner office, expense account, beautiful car allowance, all of that. 27 years old, and I won't tell you who it is because the thing that they wanted me to do, they were being acquired by a Fortune 500 company. And what was being dangled in front of me was the CIO role for the Fortune 500 company. It's 27 years old. All I had to do was lie to my staff about what it meant to go through this merger and this acquisition. The specific signposts, points along the way, the things that would happen, how benefits would be handled, compensation, they wanted to lie to my staff and they would give me this job. I listened to what they said. I drove home that night, met my wife, Debbie. We had a new house, 2 new cars, 2 kids under the age of 5, and I told her I'm quitting, I'm gonna start my own company. There was no, I want to quit, I'm thinking about doing it. No, I am quitting my job and I am starting something else. I would not go down the path they had offered for me. It was just simply out of my integrity lane. Wouldn't do it. And what that set me up for was an incredible journey to become an entrepreneur, to discover what it meant to try and fail. I had some really awful things happen, some really wonderful things happen, but it gave me a chance to say that I am what I stand for, as opposed to just simply saying that I stood for things. So that was the first major transformation like that.
So I just want to interject, this came up a few moments ago. I was thinking about the head and the heart. Because when we were talking earlier about knowing something versus, we were talking about lane adjustments, having the information versus knowing in your heart.
Yeah.
This was sort of in your heart moment.
Oh, very, very clearly. Heart, gut.
Trust, I think you used the word trusting, and I'm
Trust.
sort of associating the trust to the heart.
That's right. Because it was really crazy. I mean, if you look at it from a risk management perspective, it was silly. It was nuts. People thought I was insane. And fortunately, my wife, who's still my wife, now almost 41 years of blissful marriage, as we talk about, it's been 98% bliss. She knows what I mean by that. And she was willing to be my backstop. She was willing to be there with me all the way through, go through what was necessary, because she knew just how powerful that decision was and how meaningful it was to do that. So I give a lot of credit to my relationship with Debbie and her willingness to be my partner, to be my cheerleader, to do what was necessary to be able to handle things at home, because it put a lot of pressure on her for me to become an entrepreneur. So it wasn't just me, Joe.
That's an excellent point. Oftentimes we have these kind of discussions, and you hear this in business, and there's a reason why you can go off and take this dive off the cliff, right? Someone's got your back.
She totally, she still has my back.
Debbie had your back at home.
I still do things like that, and she knows what I mean by that as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah, knowing is needed. If somebody's running a nuclear power plant, I want them to know. I don't want them trusting. You know what I mean? I want to have the protocol. I want to be able to see specifically what happens.
You mentioned Stephen Covey, and I'm thinking of the character competence combination there.
Exactly.
So you want someone who has the competence and know how to run the nuclear power plant, but you want somebody who has character as well. Both.
Yes.
Yeah.
Trusting has its place. There's some things that I want to just know. But when it comes to being in my lane and living the story that's meant for me, knowing has been a pretty poor teacher.
Yeah.
Trusting is where the teaching really comes in.
You had another example later on that I wanted to make sure we brought forward, where it was, in some ways, seemed like the apex. It's really, I know you consider what you're doing now at Team Tipton to be the apex, but in the sort of standard or traditional view out there, this firm you worked with, you were CTO, and you want to talk a little bit about that and what lessons you learned from that experience?
Yeah, and I'm not triggered anymore by some of the things that came forward. It was pretty emotionally challenging. yeah, so anyway, started a company, sold it to a friend. We took the combined organization from about $18 million when I sold to him in 1993. By the time it was at its apex, it was about a $500 million organization. We went public in 96. Fourth most successful IPO of the year based on shareholder return. The stock had split 2-for-1 twice. It was worth the equivalent of $320 a share. I got stock for the equivalent of $13 a share. Lots and lots of box checking.
Yeah.
It was a public company, and I was on the circuit from San Francisco to Boston to New York, going around talking with institutional investors, you know, 5-star hotels, fancy lunches, all the really heady things that you would have with that. And then our CEO decided to make a decision that I think he regretted. He became greedy, I think, and merged with an organization of a similar size, except the similar size organization had never actually been profitable. They had about $40–50 million in bad debt, and they'd never established a corporate culture. Our company, we'd been the darlings of Wall Street, like 13 consecutive quarters of double-digit bottom line and top line growth percentages. It was insane how well we were doing. We had a market carved out. Well, it came together. The day that the merger was announced, our stock dropped 40%, and 15 months later, the stock stopped trading at about 30 cents a share as we went into Chapter 11. I was in a protected class. I can't tell you how much money I was wiped out from my personal net worth. Millions was gone.
Yeah.
And it put me in a position to say, what really is meaningful at this point? What do I stand for as I go through this? There was grieving, there was anger. You take the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross grieving and death cycle. I went through all of it. And found myself kind of at the bottom in the pit of despair, high skepticism, and I decided to return to the belief that I talked about earlier. It can be really bleak, but I don't have to be that way. And that was the beginning of the transformation that I've experienced for the last almost 20 years, Joe. And it's been a roller coaster as well. It hasn't been a straight line progression. But yeah, I had everything that you'd think you'd want to have. I had all the trappings, you know, we had property, I had fancy cars, I had nice clothes. We lived in a beautiful home, we traveled frequently, and then just gone. And it's a matter of saying, now what? So
kind of a timely example with the stock market yesterday dropped 2,000 points.
Yes. Yes, and I remember getting off the plane to speak at a conference in Baltimore. This was one of those thin moments about that experience. And there was about 15 phone messages from my stockbroker and more text messages than that. There was a margin call against what we had. What had happened was the value of what we owned was less than the value of the loans against it. And I remember sitting outside the convention center in downtown Baltimore with my head in my hands, wondering how my life had gotten to this point and what was going to happen next. And that's when, sometimes when you're literally on your knees, when the world has given you some feedback of that kind, that's when I think your character really shows up.
Yeah.
That's when you're given the opportunity to know who you are and trust the process moving forward.
You kind of made some promises to yourself going forward. It takes you to Team Tipton, I think.
Yeah. I didn't know what it meant. I'm not going to be so either crazy or arrogant or both to say that I knew what my journey was going to be at that point, except that what was wasn't. And what was about to become wasn't yet. So another thin moment, not long after that, I found myself at a recreation center. My daughter and her friend were swimming, and I was reading a book. It's called The Fourfold Way by Angeles Arrien. The way of the warrior, the teacher, the healer, and the visionary. And I was reading a section about an indigenous culture, I think in Africa, about how when the warriors take their journey, they find themselves in the midst of the gray clouds. It's a walk among the gray clouds. And the way they described it was this. It said, you don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going, and you can't see where you are. But what the tribe would do with the warriors when they were taking their walk is they would treat them with honor and respect and deference. And I sat there and I put the book down. I still remember putting it right on my lap, and I said, that's not how you're treating yourself. You're treating yourself with derision and humiliation and anger and fear. And I thought, let's just try for the next 5 minutes to treat yourself with some honor and respect. See how that feels. And that was really the bottom, moving towards where I ultimately am today. I decided to fake it. Even though I wasn't feeling honorable, I decided to treat myself with honor for the first 5 minutes.
Right. That was a real intentional moment.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can remember exactly that moment. So
there's been some key moments, and I think, the lesson, if you will, is that as we consider where we are, and for those listening, you might be considering where you are in your journey, and be focusing too much on a specific outcome that is written large by others.
Yes.
But there are key moments and learnings, if you pay attention to them, that can inform and I think influence how you look at your world and how you discover what you are meant to be and how to show up and add value to this world. And I think that it's important to reflect on these things.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I think it happens for everybody. And sometimes people's fear is so pronounced and so present that they're unable to see it. It's like the coincidences that happen in the world, or synchronicities. That was unusual. I don't think so. I think coincidences are the normal. And I think synchronicities are the normal. I think what happens is that we're so busy being out of the present moment, either worrying about the past, ruminating about things that happened, or trying to invent this future that hasn't shown up yet. The only time that actually exists is right now. That's it. And how deeply are you connected to that?
Yeah, and having the sensitivity or the detection capability of seeing those synchronicities and those connection points, I think, is something that can be developed over time.
Yeah.
Why don't we kind of move and shift a little bit here, and can you tell us about Team Tipton and what that's all about, how long it's been going, and what are some of the unique things that this organization that I know is that you are doing?
Well, thank you for the chance to do that. And by the way, the organization is called Team Tipton because the people that are part of it decided that's what they wanted to call it. It wasn't me naming the organization. It's about 5.5 years now into what I thought was an experiment. And the experiment had to do with, can you really be a values-driven organization in the world today and run a profitable business? Is it possible to do both? Is it possible to bring in unbelievable professionals into a collection that share common values and common vision, and then do things that are in the category of more traditional kinds of work that you would find yourself doing for organizations? I had no idea whether it was going to be possible or not. I built a strong track record as a solopreneur. I seem to attract the right clients that fit with my values and beliefs and perspectives about things. But try this on for size. We focus on transformational change in some of the most institutionalized and bureaucratic, and in many cases toxic and unhealthy organizations you can find. We spend most of our time working in the public sector. So governmental agencies, federal, state, municipal, mostly municipal, and public education. Those are the two industries that we spend most of our time in. How easy is it to change government or public education? How much change is necessary? Well, there's an obvious connection point between the need and also the problem associated with them not moving that way. So people don't resist change, Joe. They resist being changed without their permission. We change all the time when it's our idea, but when someone's jamming it down our throat, that's when we put up our barriers. So almost every approach to change and transformation is flawed from the start because it's based on mandates. It's based on telling people what to do. So our approach is about bottom up, inside out, and some top down, but this notion of aligning the latent energy, aligning the great ideas that exist inside of an organization, setting people free from the toxicity that they find themselves in and the dysfunction and the trauma in many cases, giving them a platform to bring their best forward. They start driving their A games.
You've got passion around this.
Oh my
Bob.
goodness. You watch out what happens when people are set free and they're given the permission and the empowerment to start taking control of their future. I stand back and watch. What we do is we just sort of help move things around and start pushing and pulling so that they're able to be in that environment. And then we give them the structure and tools to be able
Now,
to move.
this is very counterintuitive in my experience in IT, leading IT as well, in that usually what happens is, you have some top tier firm come in, interview everybody, and they do it to you,
Yes.
right? And then everyone who's been in the organization for one reason or another has had challenges trying to get that kind of transformational change underway. They have good ideas, but it just doesn't ever happen. So can you speak to that dynamic?
Exactly. Well, there's a lot of consultants, and I'm going to be a little critical here for just a moment. There's a lot of consultants that think they know better. Same thing's true in education too, by the way.
Yeah, I have an
A lot of PhDs running around medicine, healthcare. Yeah. They run around thinking they know better because they have a PhD in this little tiny pixel, and they extend it to include everything. Because I have a PhD, I'm being critical. Many friends that are PhDs that are wonderful individuals, but you're right, it's I know better. And they come in with that attitude of saying, I'm going to tell you what you need to do, I'm going to show you how to do it, and then it's up to you to do it. If you don't do it, shame on you. Now pay my bill.
Right.
That's a generalization for way too many projects that happen with consulting organizations. It is counterintuitive, our approach. We start from the opposite viewpoint. So we actually have something that we call our organizational change energy scale. And it goes from 0 to 100. And at 0 is shame.
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 That's an interesting one to bring in.
Yep.
That would be one you would never hear a technologist.
Nope. So how many kids quit playing sports at 13 or 14 because they've been shamed by their coaches? How many people leave a job they really like with people they enjoy working with because their manager shames them? According to every study I've ever read, people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. So shame's at the bottom.
Yeah.
So somehow the next thing above that would be threats or coercion. Do it or else. So who knows what the economic situation is going to be now? Let's go back to 2008, 2009, 2010.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the number of people that I heard their managers say, just be glad you have this job. How motivating. I mean, how exciting is that? So threats and coercion aren't much better. Well, next on the list is a performance management system. We're going to make you do it, and if you don't, we're going to ding you and not give you a raise. Next after that is buy-in. Buy-in's the equivalent to the sun coming in and warming the floor, and people feel better in the meeting, but it doesn't change anything. So there's a threshold where we get into intentional inclusion, significant participation, and finally all the way up to full ownership. When people own things or feel like they have significant participation in it, they support it. Margaret Wheatley, 35 years ago, she said, people support what they create. And then she qualified it and said, no, people only support what they create. So we have this co-creation model of high participation, high expectation, where people are starting to lean in or step off the curb and become part of the solution because the environment is set up so that they're able to do that. The irony is that many times the people that bring us in to do the work are the ones that need to go.
Yeah.
That happens far more frequently than you might imagine. And they sometimes realize it, and sometimes the organization just kind of pushes them out like a tsunami. You thought you were hiring somebody to come in here and just indoctrinate, put us through the sheep dip, as opposed to actually going through real, authentic, sustainable transformation. So yeah, I've got passion about this because I see what it does for people. They live longer, Joe. Their marriages stay together. They're healthier.
Right.
Not only that, but the quality of what they do and how they feel about their work is significantly different. So yeah, not everybody appreciates what we do. Some people want the big I told you so project. Don't hire us.
Right. So it's interesting. Public sector, though.
On purpose.
On purpose. So this
Yes.
is very intentional. Can
Very
you talk
intentional.
about that choice? Because again, going back to sort of the traditional, if you want to be successful in business with a kind of a firm coming in, even managing transformation like this, the first thought was, well, who can afford me, right? And so talk to us a little bit about that decision.
That's an interesting question because the money exists. It's
I
whether
know,
you
but
spend it or
this
not.
is a perception thing, right?
Yep. So yes, let's speak to that. And one area where we're growing in the private sector is in conscious capitalism. So Team Tipton is also a certified B Corporation. There's only about 2,600 in the world. So Patagonia, Ben & Jerry's, Etsy are some of the more...
What is that for everyone?
So a certified B Corporation is something that we went through an assessment by an external organization that takes a look at 5 different dimensions in the way that we run our business. One of them is how we focus on our staff. What kind of compensation and ownership opportunities do we have? Another is the community impact that we have. Another has to do with environmental footprint. Then we get into our governance model, how we operate ourselves as an organization. It speaks to who we are as a business. Altruism for us is not a thing to do, it's our DNA. Corporate social responsibility is what we do every day. So we focus on making the world a better place through the power of business. So you can become a certified B Corporation, but I'll tell you, I've been through a lot of assessments. This is like the worst physical you've ever had times 10. You have to prove it to them. Yeah. So it's kind of the equivalent of LEED for buildings or fair trade for supply chain, organic for agriculture. It's a respected designation that somebody else gives you based upon their assessment. So what this does is it speaks especially to the younger generation who wants to work with and for an organization that has values, altruism, purpose. All things being equal, they're going to come work for us because we believe in what we stand for. We actually deliver it. So anyway, our focus also, there's something in the state of Colorado and about 35 other states where you can become a public benefit corporation. It's a legal designation. It's a corporate designation. And the best example I can use to describe it is had Whole Foods been a public benefit corporation, they could have fought off the Amazon takeover. Because they have their public benefit on the same footing as their shareholder return. So we file a statement with the Colorado Secretary of State every year to say what was our benefit this year. So we focus on organizations that serve humanity and the greater good. So naturally public education, naturally government, but also conscious capitalist organizations. Companies that look at being able to do well while they're doing good. So what we're attracting to us are companies that are interested in making a difference in the world.
And you're attracting potential employees, as we talked about a little bit earlier today, with vast experience who are looking for that as well.
Yes. Yes, and that's at different stages, right? So you and I maybe, I don't know what your listeners' demographics are, but we're at a certain place in life.
Right.
The millennials for sure as a generation are interested in altruism and purpose. They want to be able to talk to their network about where they work and use language like this place means something. It's an intangible, it is necessary for that generation. But I find most of us, as we get older, we want to be connected to something that lasts beyond us. So one of my philosophies we haven't talked about yet, but this really drives me every day, is I want to give everything away that I have in terms of knowledge and skill and experience. I can't take it anywhere with me.
Right.
I'm on a mission to give it away. So anyway, yeah, public sector intentionally. With one other dimension too. Folks that work for public education organizations in the public sector, they have a heart for serving others. It may have been beat out of them in day 2 of their employment, but they go into those professions for a reason.
For that reason, yeah.
We're able to recapture that energy, bring it back to the surface, accelerate it together and have a group full of people that are saying, we're here to serve people. Let's do something with that. That's a little harder to find in the private sector.
What I hear a lot in your voice besides your passion is you know how to make key decisions. You know what your yes is.
Yes.
And it really helps us to be intentional about discovering that and knowing what our yes is so we know how to say no. You hear a lot about time management and guiding your life, key principles, but you really need to understand your yes before you can say no.
Yeah. Yeah, to me it is. It's what you're able to say yes to and why. So there's no perfect answer for any person. I'll tell you, one of the things that came out of this, I got out of technology and I moved into this, was a period where I laid off hundreds of people over a 6-month period. It was brutal. And I conducted a lot of the exit interviews on my own. I wanted to do it with professionalism and compassion. And I told them, all of them, there's nothing wrong with you. The situation is poor, but you're not. And then I offered to help them. Read resumes, call up and yell at me. I'll have lunch or coffee, coaching. I had no idea what I was signing up for, Joe. Hundreds of people took me up on it. And what I got to learn through that process is how people go through transformational change, how they are open or not open to moving into the lane that's meant for them, how they start to say yes. And there's some specific things that I actually was able to tease out from all those hundreds of experiences. First is, you need to be able to have dreaming as part of your awareness. If you don't have the big idea and the thing that really brings energy to you as a possibility, it doesn't exist. So what would you do even for no money? How much time do you spend thinking about that? As opposed to just ruminating about what I need to do next. You ever wonder why you get the same job over and over again, or get into the same relationship over and over again? It's because your choices are so narrow. Now there's some brain science behind that too. When we're adrenalized, our brain basically goes to 3 choices: fight, flight, or freeze.
We seek safety.
Yeah. We don't look at choices and options.
Right.
So you need to relax, dream a little. And that's necessary. So that's a critical component to be able to start getting connected to your yes, is to bring that part of your desire, your future into your awareness.
And do you do that on a regular basis?
Oh, yeah.
And get a little practical here, the practical tips and tricks here maybe.
Yeah, and again, this is different for everybody. So first of all, I suck at meditation. I'm really not good at it based upon the traditional approach to doing it. Really not good. I read a book years ago called Stopping, Even When You Have to Keep Going. And what this book helped me with was to find the quiet spaces in between things, as opposed to an hour where I would sit with my eyes closed and my fingers connected. It's at the stoplight. There's a moment of silence that you have available to you. Or schedule 50-minute meetings instead of 60-minute meetings. You can get the same amount done in 50 minutes. And when you schedule a 10-minute passing period, you're intentionally resetting and refreshing your energy. You're recapturing, you're washing off the negative energy from the meeting you just came from. There's a process associated with it. So turn off the radio in my car. I almost never listen to the radio in my car. I like the silence and the quiet. So it's an intentional process to tune out the distractions and get connected to the energy that's uniquely mine. And I do that a little bit at a time all day long.
And that's really timely right now because there's so much notifications, the whole smartphones, we're pinged constantly unless we're intentionally turning off those notifications or shutting the power down. There's no space in our lives anymore. We're constantly, and our attention spans have gone so short because of that. So doing this kind of the self-discovery and dreaming is something you need to provide space for.
Yes, I'm going to change one of the words you just used.
Please.
I choose to make space for it. Need to make space for it isn't quite high enough energy.
Yeah.
Choose to make space for it, totally different.
Yeah, it means a lot different.
Right, so when we talk about the present moment, a lot of people talk about that, the false self, living in the present moment, the true self. There's a lot of stuff out there.
Be here now and all.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right, sure.
Well, to me, it's a really simple thing. When an alert shows up, or a news story, or a post, or a like, or something shows up on my phone, what it's doing is anchoring me into my confirmation bias. It's anchoring me into what I've already know, what I already believe. And it's reminding me of what I am, or what I have been, as opposed to what I am and where I'm going. So I'll tell you, people are addicted to their confirmations. You find it when, I mean, let's just look at our political world for a second, and no, I'm not going to talk politics. How many people are completely unwilling to listen to what the other side has to say about anything? They just rule it out.
Yeah.
Good idea or bad idea, it's just because it's from that other side, I'm not listening. Well, what options are we eliminating because we have that as part of our approach? So something else that I do too when I do look at the news that's coming across is I look at a multiple set of sources. I don't rely upon one, because all that does is reinforce what I already believe. So it's either confirmation bias or inattentional blindness, or a combination of the two, that keeps us anchored where we are.
That's powerful. So other practical things you could suggest to others listening in?
Well, another one is to take on the mind of a beginner. Do something that you're terrible at. Like snowboarding, or speaking a different language, or learning how to make green chili, or
Salsa dancing.
Salsa dancing.
Which would be a good
I
example
will never
for me.
be good at dancing. Talk to Debbie about that. She knows that for sure. Be clumsy, be awkward, be unprepared, be something that you're not used to being. Be out of your comfort zone. Do something intentional that causes you to feel that, I'm not quite sure how I feel about this. That's when discovery starts to happen. Discovery starts to happen when you don't know what you don't know. And if we're constantly living in the world of I know everything, nothing ever comes into your awareness that can be something new.
That's really interesting. You know, a musical metaphor, I mentioned earlier, I play guitar.
Sure.
You know, and there's this notion of finding your own voice, right? So you can stay in the same rote practices, play things the way someone else has performed them, you know, mimic, versus actually discover and find your own voice. So some of this connects, I think, to that same kind of concept of
Art, writing,
Yeah.
music, any of those creative endeavors are very much like that. Do you want to duplicate what somebody else has done, or do you want to extend and have it speak to you?
I want to take a couple moments now, if we can, talk about some of the books you've written,
Okay.
right? Because we've obviously some of your heart has come into your books, but tell us about some of the books you've written and how they kind of played a part in, you know, where you are right now in terms of your viewpoint.
Sure. So there's really two. I wrote
I
two
think
that are
of
more
John.
technology related,
Yeah.
and then two that are more in the personal transformation, human-centered design, organizational shift, consciousness kind of a realm. I wrote a book called Jump, Get Unstuck, and it's actually has become a bit of a manual for people that are in the midst of a career life transformation. That's not how I wrote it. That was not the purpose behind it, but that's how people tend to use it. It's written in a fable where there's an organization that happens to be based here in Colorado that finds themselves in some really dire circumstances, totally out of their realm of experience. They need to get answers quickly. And what it does is it goes through the innovation process, the human-centered design model, to be able to bring a completely different way of thinking about transformational change. You experience it through the characters, you live who you might be or who you might relate to. And then at the end of it, I also put in the process model so that you can see the actual steps and stages, and for people that want to be able to see the provability associated with something, it's all there. Well, like I said, I didn't intend it to be used for individual transformation, but that's how most people use it. I facilitated workshops for thousands of people through that book, using the tools that are there, helping them move to the next best iteration of themselves. It was originally written for organizations to get into. Well, it's based in really 4 very different areas. One of them is the strange world of quantum physics, the science of possibilities, sound leadership principles, ancient philosophy. I mean, there's stuff in there that is really, really old. And then I'm a student of spirituality and how we might be connected to something larger than ourselves. You can read the book on all 4 different levels and get something out of it. And if you're able to read it at all 4 levels, then it's really a different experience. So that's one. And then the most recent book that I have is called What's Right, Not Who's Right. It's a simple shift to regain our humanity. and improve our relationships at home and at work? Well, it's a simple thing to say what's right, not who's right, until you put it into practice. And this is a book that I wrote in response to the 2016 election here in the United States. I got tired of the snarky, evil, mean-spirited behavior that people were demonstrating, irrespective of where they lined up on the outcome. We have lost our humanity as a people to be able to talk to each other, to relate to each other. So it's a series of about 13 practical steps to be able to help regain your humanity, to be able to see the other as you. I mean, there's some really deep principles here as well that we can get into about how this book works, the principles of racism, etc., how we categorize. So I have a mission to get that book in the hands of all elected officials in the United States. I just didn't realize that was 435,000 individuals.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a lot of people on boards and city councils and just a ton of elected officials. Well, we've gotten in the hands of a lot. We're in the thousands at this point, and we're on a mission to get more. So if you want to go to our website, teamtipton.com, you go to What's Right, Not Who's Right, it'll tell you exactly how to do that. For the price of shipping and handling, we'll send it to anybody and have them be able to take advantage of the messages there.
One final question for you, and we've touched on this, and it's a question that's often asked in these type of settings, and that is, what advice would you give to your 26-year-old self? I put it a year before your 27th year because I know that's your launch year. And I'm sure we've touched on some of the same.
Yeah, and that's an interesting question. The first thing that I would do to talk to my younger self is I would forgive my younger self for some of the ills and sins of youth. The things that we think are very important at that point in time aren't quite so important as you get older. The things that we think are essential and just have to have, that's not necessary. I would also tell myself to relax. Back in those days, Joe, I was spending a lot of my life trying to fill a hole inside of me with all the wrong things. With affluence, with accomplishment, with wealth, with accolades. I mean, if we've got time, a quick story.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
My wife Debbie and I, we finished our basement and I went virtual at the same time. So I got to move home from work. Well, we split having a shared office at that point. And I got to set up my office the way I wanted to. She could set up her office the way that she wanted to. Well, she's an artist and her idea of physical space is quite different than mine. She wants projects out and supplies and stuff. Anyway, I went downstairs and put all the stuff in my office that I wanted to have, and on the wall I created this beautiful I love me wall with all the certificates and me shaking hands with famous people and recognition for, and it's all about me. I love me. And I did get out the laser level, not quite the micrometer, but I got out the laser level in order to make it all fit. Well, I went upstairs and Debbie had spent the day working on her office, and she put things on her wall that she thought was important to show. She put family pictures on the wall, and there I was, front and center. So it's another one of those thin moments where I had the opportunity to transform immediately. Rather than inviting her down to say, let's take a look at what's in my office, what I said to her instead was, I'll be back. I went downstairs, took everything off the wall. It's in a box to this day. So I will tell myself at that point in time in my life, that's relax. Some of the things that you're so concerned about really don't mean that much. Everything will be fine. You turned out pretty well, Bob. You turned out well because people respect you. You have the opportunity to do meaningful things. You're making a difference in the world.
Bob, thank you so much for coming in today.
My pleasure,
meeting
Joe.
with me.
Thank you.
I'm really pleased that you're my number one on the podcast, and I know that others will be really excited to go through this material, and make sure you do check out Team Tipton and those book references. Thanks again, Bob.
Thank you, Joe.